white just because I feel that's a great place to start. I don't think this is going to take as long as the eye, but you know, you never know. So I thought I'd start this one grayscale, and then, you know, this one, even though my reference is in grayscale, maybe this one I could try a little color depending on our time together that we have. So start wherever you feel. It's just, yeah, grayscale is easier. And for my grayscale, I am actually using black and white, just black and white. I've got ivory black, titanium white for that. And I am still going to do a wash, and my wash, I'm just going to do alizarin crimson just to give it a little warmer tone underneath. I could also do a gray wash. Any color wash would be fine. Again, the purpose of that is just to set a ground, middle value, and to build up my paint. And welcome, Mary. Great to have you.
Thank you. A few router problems.
Oh no, I'm glad it worked out.
Yes, me too.
I know it's snowing heavy here last night. I was like, uh-oh, hopefully we'll be okay. But we are. So
snowing, how many inches did you get?
You know, I'm not exactly sure 100%, but I want to say it was around like 5 to 6 inches.
Wow.
So yeah,
a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, my car is covered. I got home last night, and you know, I'm inside talking to my husband for just like 10 minutes. I look outside, my car is like covered. You know, it's crazy.
Wow. That is crazy.
It was really beautiful yesterday morning, though. Those great big.
Oh, yes.
You know, because I live on the 7th floor, and it's just like this wonderful fairyland.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is beautiful without a doubt. Things like, or snow always makes me wish I lived in like a condo situation though. So I didn't have to take care of it.
For sure.
That's okay. So this wash is just super duper light. Just a nice flat brush. Again, this could be any color you wanted. It's just setting a ground for my painting. And I've got the reference photo here. And again, you know, even though we are using a reference, don't feel super bound to it because this is a photograph. We are doing a painting. So it's up to you how blended you want this to be. I'm going to start mine very blocky though. I'm not going to be blending like really at all in the beginning. And if any of you are doing, if you're doing color right away and you have questions on color, feel free to let me know. I can try to help you troubleshoot. So what I'm going to do to get my paint ready here is I'm going to just get a nice bit of white. And then of course my black. And when I'm doing grayscale, I am just using this pure black. I could still mix my black if I wanted to. Again, those recipes would be ultramarine blue and burnt umber makes a nice black. And then deep violet and phthalo green makes a really nice black too. So if you want to mix your own black, go for it. But when I'm doing full on grayscale, I do like to use the black from the tube. And then I'm just pulling out some different brushes. I pretty much just have some flats and rounds and then some detail brush. There's not a lot of fine detail, so I'm probably not really going to need that a ton, but perhaps a little in the beginning or in the end, sorry. So I'm actually going to start with a round today. And the first thing I'm going to do is just get some values ready. So I'm just going to pull out some white, add a little black to it, and just kind of mix a few range of values. If you do have like any retarder that you can mix in with your paint to keep it wet longer, sometimes this is a nice time to use that because you're mixing like little piles of paint and it helps just keep things wet. So, and just remember, retarder does thin your paint a little bit too. It's part of how it keeps it wet for a while. You could also use the gloss glazing liquid too, but I just mix a little bit of that in, and then I'm going to Just mix a few more little piles of grays. This particular nose here, this reference, aside from the nostril area, doesn't have a lot of really dark darks. So most of my values are going to be a little bit lighter. But again, you can always push values if you want to. Oops. And it's up to you how many little values you want to mix ahead of time, but I think it's just nice to have a few. And then as far as where to start on the nose, also welcome Susan. Where to start on the nose is kind of up to you. You could start like with the nostril area and block in all the dark values first. Or perhaps you want to just block in a large portion of mid-tone value on the side of the nose. It's kind of up to you how you want to start. There's, many different ways you could approach that. So, as always, don't feel like you have to start in one particular place. But because I've got this nice kind of mid-value loaded up on my brush, I'm going to go ahead and just start to block in the sides with this mid-tone value. And again, it's going to look very blocky in the beginning. Okay, blocking in just refers to filling in those large kind of areas of value and just kind of paying attention to the loose shape they create. So I'm not really worrying about my transitions between values or areas of the nose at this time. I'm just going to block in that basic value. And that's why I put extra lines in here just as a visual for myself. It's up to you how much you want to do that. And then just kind of fill in this mid-tone. And, if you are painting a different nose, if you're not following along with the same reference that I am, just look for your kind of mid-tone shapes. Every nose, of course, is different, every single nose. So you can just kind of customize it based on, the values that you see. And mine's maybe perhaps a little bit darker than what's here, but of course my tones are just kind of different. I could, maybe add a little blue to my paint to kind of match it to the photo more, but that's really fine. I don't mind that it's a little different. So I'm going to continue with the same value that I have. I have not changed it yet, and I'm just blocking it in kind of around the nose. The thing about the nose is the skin around it is also important to help show that it's three-dimensional. So I think painting just a little bit around the skin is nice. Now this reference does have a bit of her eyes. You could put those in if you wanted. I don't think I'm going to. I'm just going to use the kind of tone around her nose to block that in. And I think it's really fun to just try a bunch of different noses and just do some little nose studies, because again, every nose is so different. Each one's going to teach you something. Try different, I thought it'd be good to start with just a front facing nose, but you could definitely try 3/4 where it's slightly turned to the left or right, or even a full profile from the side. And same thing, I'm just blocking in a little bit more on this side. And remember, sometimes your underneath values can be a little bit larger than they need to be, because that's kind of helpful for the layering process. But just like I kind of block in the same value, I've got it on my brush, most everywhere that I see it. Not that I can't go back to this value, but I do like to get kind of this framework in. It's just visually, I think, helpful. And then really, you're seeing a little bit of this value underneath here too. Squinting, as always, I mentioned that a lot, but squinting can be very helpful if you're having trouble differentiating the different values. Also, remember on your phone, if you have different apps to edit photos, sometimes editing and bumping up the contrast when you're painting from a reference photo can be helpful, just so you can see the values a little bit easier. So I'm just going to turn a little background music on for us a minute. Painting things like this can be fun to snap pictures of along the way to document your process too, because it really does look it's going to look very blocky for a bit here. So I lighten this value just a little bit here, and I'm just going to use this to kind of bring in just a little bit of the skin around the nose. And I'm not really worrying too much about it blending. I'm layering slightly, but I'm going to kind of deal with the blending later. And then also remember too, we've talked about this in the past, that, you know, layering sometimes is an illusion that happens, or sorry, blending is an illusion sometimes that happens through the process of layering. That's what I meant to say. And so I'm just kind of gradually shifting my values now and continuing this block-in process. And in my head, you know, it's really easy for us to think about the fact we're painting a nose right now. You know, it's like our left brain is identifying, this is a nose, this is a nose. But to the best of your ability, if you can just try to think about shapes and values, or if you're using color, you can also think about color, but what value do you see and what shape is it in? That's all I'm thinking about right now. The nose part, we'll deal with that later. That'll happen. The nose will form, but sometimes in the beginning stage, it's easy to identify and get kind of caught up in how it's looking. And this part, it's just not going to look super great yet. So just keep that in mind. So it's a process, trust that process. And I haven't used any like pure black yet. I'm just, you know, shifting between these values. And again, is it light? Is it dark? What little shape does it make? And remember, when I say shape, I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, perfect circles and squares and things, right? We're talking about just little shapes that the certain values make. And I could use a flat brush, but to be honest, painting a nose like this, it is so rounded and just, you know, with the curved, a round brush does tend to work really well, but a flat brush can produce some really nice strokes as well, as can other brushes, you know, filberts, brights, any kind of brush you're wanting to use can be really, really nice. And shift back to the dark values as you need to. You know, it's not like I'm starting with a dark and then I won't ever go back to it. Sometimes you'll need to a little bit. I'm going to block in this part of the bridge that's this much lighter value, and it, you know, we're seeing this big harsh line right now, which you do see a line, but it's a lot softer in the the photo. So we'll soften that later. But for now, again, I'm just blocking in the value. And then just pay attention to the shape or the, you know, is it very straight? Is it sort of angled or curved? Again, that helps capture that kind of shape of a person's nose. But facial features, you know, they can be just very challenging and they're so unique to an individual person. So I really do think isolating the subject matter like this is a really great way to practice it. And then when you apply it to a portrait later, or I mean, even if you're drawing too. So I think, you know, drawing helps you with painting and painting helps you with drawing. I mean, they really do work together. So. And, you know, think about the shape or the angle or direction of your brush stroke too. You know, when we're doing these kind of long lines across the bridge, it makes sense to have big, long strokes. But as you're coming to kind of the ball, that the point of that nose, you know, it's a little bit more rounded here. So think about how you might change your brush stroke to kind of help capture that. Instead of having just up and down where this appears super flat, I want to think of this having a little bit, you know, or, you know, kind of touch your own nose a little bit and you can kind of get that structure a little bit, you know, that kind of, this point is coming out toward us. And there is more of a highlight on there, but for now I'm just kind of blocking it in as this light mid-tone. And then I'll bring the highlights in at the end. And I'm just kind of going back and forth between these values here to get, you know, different ranges because it's not just 3, you know, there's definitely more than that. So I'm kind of going in between all these little piles of middle values that I made. The other thing you can do when you're practicing something like this, you can actually paint it in grayscale first, and then you can glaze color on top, or you can do full on just color on top too. So some people will paint underneath, kind of like an underpainting first to get the value structure. Just like people will render, artists will render a painting in charcoal full value or graphite full value before they paint it too. So, you know, those are strategies you can use if you feel like it might help you. Occasionally I'll put just like a little bit of water on my brush, not a ton, but just to kind of help the paint flow a little bit more. So we're getting close to being done with the block in. I'm still going to work a little bit of the skin underneath the nose that has a similar effect as the sides. It just helps with the structure. And then of course I want to start to block in the dark values with the nostril openings and then the shadow. Because remember, the nose is sticking out. So there's a lot of shadow that it casts directly underneath. But the nose, especially more than any other face feature, is so dependent on these shadows, these lights, these darks. It's how we can see it and make it appear dimensional on a flat painting. And so what I'm doing now is just kind of going in and just, there's a few little gaps I had as I was blocking in. So I just want to kind of fill these in a minute before I start to approach the bottom of the nose. Again, I'm not worried about blending just yet. Kind of as I start to blend, I'll start to talk through that with what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. I do find though, when you put your brush strokes on a little slower, you might even say like intentional brush strokes, just being very thoughtful about where you're applying them, and you paint a little slower, there's almost a blend that kind of starts to happen when you just kind of slow down a little bit. So different ways to get different effects. There's a lot more little adjusting to do through here too, but again, I'm just worried about that basic block in and structure at this point. So I'm just kind of checking before I move down too much further, you know, do I have the dark values kind of where they need to be? If not, you know, what little adjustment could I make? Okay, so I am going to just really quickly, before I get the nostrils in, just block in a little bit of this kind of lighter value we see happen down here. I really do think painting from a reference for facial features like this is just really, really good, because when we paint things from our mind or imagination, we tend to simplify them or kind of turn them into symbols a little bit. So as you're going around and observing, you're just going to notice so many little things. It's going to help you. And, you know, if there's a time where you feel like you want to make changes from the reference photo, or you want to do something differently, you can. You can change things as much as you want to. You know, never feel too bound to that reference photo. But it has helpful information for us, like what's light, what's dark, where the shadows are sitting. Again, this lighter value around the nose just really helps. It's going to help make things start to pop out even more. But I depending on how you feel like you're doing right now, I mean, this definitely can be challenging if it's the first time you're ever painting a nose ever. But remember too that after you get going on this and keep practicing, it's going to get easier. You know, think of all the little things you might be able to isolate in paintings. Even like, you know, if you want to be really good at painting flowers, like isolating petals and leaves and getting real good at those individually, and then trying a whole bunch of them together. So I'm about ready to start blocking in a little bit more of the nostril area. I still don't know that I want to go pure black, although it is pretty dark. The only thing is there's no other really, really dark areas on the nose. So I'm going to start with a very dark gray, and I can always gradually darken it, because sometimes a dark gray will do the trick, and it doesn't need to be a pure black. And I've actually been using the same brush the whole time, still using this little round, the size 5. I think trying different size noses would be very interesting too, much like the eye, because the smaller the nose is, right, the less detail is there. It can also be fun to try noses, you know, with little freckles or like different kind of skin, you know, all different kinds of skins and things like that can just really make you very versatile in your painting. That's why I like the unsplash.com too, is because I enjoy painting, especially when it comes to like portraits. It's really nice to practice painting people you don't know. Because when you paint someone you know, there's that extra, I don't know, you know them so well. And when you're painting a stranger or like just a model or something, it's to me it feels a little less restricting, or I'm a little less hard on myself about it, maybe, where I just find it a little easier. I don't know. So just nice dark gray there. And then really that's the darkest part. So I'm still, you know, really you're playing with a lot of grays here if you are doing this grayscale. I mean, that's really what's happening. Lots of grays. And, you know, be careful with outlining. There's really nothing in this reference that appears very outlined. So as you're choosing values, remember to take those values and pull them down, just so they, again, don't appear like they're outlined. And if you want to go for a more stylized nose that's more outlined, you can. Said there's all different styles. And just this darker value, there's some small little areas where I'm seeing it. So I'm just starting to kind of fill this in a little bit. Just working with some very kind of small lines and small little shapes right now, but this round brush is still working good for me. So and adjust as much as you need to. Remember, acrylic can be forgiving in the sense that if something, you know, if the value's not quite right or the color's not quite right, you don't like what it looks like, just let it dry and you can paint right over top of it. Okay, I'm getting close to being finished with my blocking. See, how's everyone feeling so far? You guys feeling okay? Hopefully the nose feels a little easier than the eye. Eyes too, you get those eyelashes. Eyelashes can be tricky. And here there's, you know, some darker values that I just, you know, I want to be a little careful because I don't want to lose some of this shape. So in mine, for example, I see some little areas where I kind of need to refine up here and actually lighten it. But before I do that, I'm just going to block in this darker value. So I pretty much have like at least a thin layer of paint on everything now. And so you can see, I mean, there's definitely areas that need some attention. You know, it's a block in at this phase. So now I can just go back in and just kind of make some little adjustments. Some artists call this like an adjustment layer, actually, on top of a block in. They'll purposefully kind of go through and before they get any blending done, they'll just kind of go in and just adjust any values that need a little adjusting. Because sometimes in that block in, you know, it's loose, can be quick for some people. Like this value through the middle here, the bridge, I want to lighten this. So I'm just bringing, it's not a pure white. Still, I took a little white and took a little of my gray and mixed it. I want to start building that up. And what you can do to kind of, you know, make more of a transition to is even bring some in-between values. Remember, grays just have such a big range. And I'm just paying attention, like how far does this kind of light value actually go up to? And just making all those little fine adjustments. And don't forget to pull away from your painting too. Step back, look at it from a little bit of a distance, because remember, when you're so up close to it, you're not always accurately, you know, seeing it actually. And some of these adjustments that I'll make, you know, my brush strokes sometimes will even kind of be like just little taps or just kind of gently kind of adding paint on top. It's not always necessarily super thick paint. And then just a reminder, glazing is the technique after you have a layer of paint over everything. You can either use water or a gloss glazing liquid, such as this one, Golden makes it. I also have a Liquitex version in a smaller container. This is great for just making your paint a little bit more transparent, allowing you to kind of get some subtle variations between values. And again, water can do this too. You're essentially thinning down your paint and creating a wash, much like the wash that we did when we started. Whoa, whoops, a little bit of an explosion. Glazing medium kind of had a little splatter. Okay, I think we're good now. Do a little pressure. Again, just having some kind of more transparent paint can just, imagine it's like when you go outside and you put sunglasses on, right? It's like a filter or kind of the see-through lens that you can see what's underneath, but just alter how it's seen. So that's essentially what like a glaze will do. This, you know, all these little kind of subtle transitions, just kind of going in between, and then moving your brush kind of in different directions or kind of tapping it can help create more of a transition from one tone into another. Also, dry brushing can be effective. That's where you take a dry paintbrush on top of wet paint and you kind of lightly tap to create a softer transition. Or sometimes you can even dry brush with a little bit of paint actually on the brush and just kind of very lightly. You can even scumble, which is just moving your brush kind of in a circular motion. Scumbling is a nice way to kind of create softer edges, so your lines just aren't as harsh between values. And of course, lighting is going to depend on how we see shadows on our nose. Sometimes there are harsh lines on a nose and harsh edges. It just, again, depends how the light is being cast. It's just, you know, kind of going around and adjusting and pushing values and darkening where it's darker. Push those shadows, push those highlights. And then, you know, when you get to a point where you think, okay, I might be done or I could be done with this, that's especially when you want to step back and really look at it, you know, at least at arm's length, maybe even further than that. If you have a little ledge or something, you could prop it up on and take some steps back. And a lot of these little strokes that I'm making, little brush marks, are very small at this point. You know, a lot of the big filling in is done. It's just that kind of refinement now. And shading, and as much as you want to shade. Again, I can't stress enough how I highly recommend getting yourself some glazing liquid if you don't have any. It's a really, really nice way to just subtly blend and kind of make these little changes.
And that's because it makes the paint wetter, or what?
It's because it makes the paint transparent.
Transparent.
It makes it transparent while keeping it still like holding like the integrity of the paint, basically. You're not, sometimes if you put way too much water in with paint, it can break down the binder, which is, you know, how it seals and how the, you know, how it all works. So that's why using a glazing medium can be really good, because it doesn't break down the binder at all, but allows you to get these nice transparent washes. So that's kind of exclusively what I'm doing now, is I'm really thinning down or mixing in a lot of glazing medium. So again, it's just allowing me to very slightly kind of make these changes. But again, if you don't have any, you can also use a little water. And two, just remember that skin around the nose is very important. And two, you know I painted in grayscale today, so we can always, do another session and I can definitely go through this in color too. But I always like to kind of start at the beginning or as close as possible. And I just do think that painting grayscale first is just very helpful, because color does add another component. But then again, sometimes it's just nice to dive in and just try it. Like, why not? Like, what do you have to lose? So it's just, whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever you feel like trying. And there's no reason like you'd even have to use realistic colors to paint a nose. It's like really fun to just bring in a bunch of other colors. So lots of extensions of this little exercise you could do to kind of keep practicing. And two, just remember, the more you do it, the easier it's going to get, the more comfortable you're going to feel. So I'm just I'm still using the same little brush, but really just putting a little bit of paint on it. And I'm kind of going through now, and just anywhere where I'm seeing like a little more highlight, I'm just starting to bring that highlight in. And I definitely see some differences from mine than the reference photo, but that's okay, because this was just a simple reference. I wasn't trying to necessarily be super bound to it, more so using it for the value structure and information. So yeah, don't feel discouraged if your nose doesn't look identical. It's no worries. And if reproducing something exact is what you want to work on too, it's just, again, more practice. Kind of a matter of what you want to do with it. And I personally just find creating more enjoyable when I'm not, so stressed out over something. Oh, does it gotta look exactly like this? Because it doesn't. So however it comes out, and eventually, you can just put this away. Just even stop looking at the reference and use what you have here. And you can decide for yourself, like, kind of use what you know about light. We've been talking a little about light and shadow with our basic forms. A nose is just a form too. So think about the part that sticks up the highest is, of course, going to be the lightest typically. So I'm just gonna push that highlight a little bit. Of course, I'm not gonna have time for color today, so I always get a little ambitious, like, well, maybe I'll have time for two, but yeah, now it's just little kind of fine detailing, and just notice how nothing is like super dark outlines, right? Everything is shadow that is building the edge of the nose. We're just playing with shadows and highlights. That's how we see a nose, not outlines. But again, I'm never knocking outlines, okay? I'm just trying to talk about it in a more not necessarily hyper realistic, but on the more realistic end of things. But I think illustrating and adding stylization to noses is a super fun thing to do. And if that interests you, I think you should explore it. Like that can be really, really fun to think about. How could you kind of make it fun and stylized and not look super real, but look like a nose. So that's, I mean, also a skill. And I just have a little, I feel like I'm the type of person too, I can play around with things for quite a while and just kind of keep adjusting. So I'll just try to get to a point where I'm like, okay, I've explored this enough, and then call it good. But I do want to soften up some of these edges just a little bit, some of these lines. I mean, we do see the lines in the actual photo, but if you do have something that looks kind of outliney, you know, just try to bring a little bit more of that value into it. And then you can actually just kind of work some of it into the actual, you know, the skin. But then other times shadows do look kind of like just simple lines. So, I mean, it can be different depending. And there, you know, you might want to at times just let this kind of dry up and leave it alone and then come back and add to it. You know, don't feel like you have to finish it in one setting, even though it's a little study. You can take your time with it. No, I guess I really probably didn't need to tape this, but I'm just gonna go ahead and peel the tape off a minute. And two, it's like once you also put this in the context of the rest of the face, you know, things start to really come together too. But, you know, feel free to, at the end, if you did want to grab like a little liner brush, sometimes I'll just kind of go through and just, you know, kind of pop in a little bit more detail. And sometimes, like if I do put a little bit of a line down to get a shadow, then I just kind of take my brush and just kind of like pull it out a little bit. And that can kind of help get with that, the shadow. Again, you can glaze your shadows too. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left. Like I said, I could keep refining. I mean, definitely not totally perfect here. You know, as I look at it, I see little things like, oh, I can kind of clean up this edge a little bit. you know, so there may be little adjustments to kind of make, but like as far as the loose structure, it's like this is kind of what you need to look for is what's light, dark, how can you kind of put that together to create this sort of, you know, illusion that that's popping out. Of course, too, once you start to bring color in, color tends to make things look more realistic as well. So yeah, here, I'll stop our music for a minute. And I will remove my spotlight. Let's see if